Hello, and welcome to Reshaping Energy, Reuters Events' latest energy transition webinar, which will explore business model innovation in the context of transition. My name is Owen Rolt. I head up the energy transition team here at Reuters Events, and I'll be your chair for today. Thank you, everyone tuning in, and those, of course, now listening on demand. So our mission is to unite the energy ecosystem, to tackle the energy transition head on, and to drive towards a low carbon, sustainable, and ultimately inclusive energy future. To that regard, you will very much have the capacity to ask questions throughout the session, and we'll see how many of those we can get to at the end. This episode will unpack what it means to be a company in transition and explore how companies can continue to service the needs of an increasingly energy hungry population whilst navigating the road to net zero. The building of the future energy system will require a radical overhaul of both the current energy and business ecosystems, with the traditional industry dividing lines set to be blurred. Joining us today to discuss and debate, we have the pleasure of welcoming Drew Murphy, SVP of Strategy and Corporate Development at Edison International, and Bruce Chung, SVP of Strategy and M&A at NRG Energy. Gentlemen, thank you very much both for joining us today. Drew, let's come to you first. Maybe just to kick things off, can you talk to us a little bit more about, I guess, your role at Edison and how that fits into the wider energy transition strategy?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Owen, and glad to be here and good to be back with my old colleague, Bruce. Great topic. Really, one I think that's frankly more timely today as I sit here in Southern California than probably any time in my career, to be honest with you, with what's going on here. My view is that we're seeing right now the impacts of climate change in real time. And it just makes the urgency of trying to address the energy transition all that much more clear to me and to the company. So I head up strategy, as you said, in corporate development for Edison International, which is the parent company of Southern California Edison. That's our biggest holding. We also have some other activities outside of that utility, but that's one of the largest regulated utilities, electric utilities in the US, one of the largest in the state of California. We serve about 15 million residents of Southern California, covering 50,000 square miles, which right now feels like a lot of territory to have to be looking out for. Our strategy and our sort of whole mission really at the company now is geared towards addressing greenhouse gas reduction, climate change, and making sure that we're positioning ourselves and aligning with the state's role and frankly, broader society's role in moving to a clean energy future. That is the core of our mission, to be a leader in that energy transition. Part of what we've done over the last several years is to step back and take a look at how we can actually make that vision and that mission more concrete for us as a company, and frankly for the rest of the economy, especially in California. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when the state first passed some of the most aggressive forward-looking greenhouse gas legislation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the state by 40% of 2005 levels, 40% by 2030, we stepped back and said, okay, how are we going to do that? But not just how are we going to do it as the electric sector, as Southern California Edison. How's the economy going to do that? Because we have to sort of look at this economy-wide. It has to be an integrated effort. And we put out a paper called the Clean Energy Pathway, focusing a lot on, frankly, electrification as one of the primary drivers to get there. The state has since moved to implement even more aggressive policy to make sure that we're moving to essentially carbon neutrality by 2045 to align with the 1.5 degree scenarios that are out there. And so we updated our work and our pathway work, and I put out back about a year ago our Pathway 2045 paper. I'm happy to talk more about that, but that's sort of the linchpin that we anchor around, which is looking at all the things that need to happen to make sure that we can get to those goals. We think those goals are frankly the minimum that we all need to be aiming towards to make sure that we can really try to address climate change in a meaningful way across the economy. And I'll just say there's 3 main pieces to it. We can come back to it, to what we think we need to do, especially in California, but more broadly. One is to really further drive clean energy, zero carbon energy into the electric system. So that's been ongoing for a while, but we have to continue to do that to get to net really clean, 100% clean energy delivery by 2045. We've got to use that clean energy electric system to electrify significant portions of the economy, starting with transportation and moving on to space and building and water heating and other activities. And then where there are areas where electrification isn't really feasible, especially energy intensive activities and industries, we're going to have to really help lean in on developing zero and low carbon fuels and net zero fuels, such as hydrogen, renewable natural gas, other things. So those are the pieces of the strategy, and we can talk more about them as we go forward.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks for that. It's really interesting to hear, and by the sounds of things, when then looking at kind of that 2045 kind of energy mix, you see that then as kind of a highly electrified system with kind of backup alternative kind of low carbon fuels as well. Are there any other kind of key features of what that 2045 ecosystem looks like in your eyes?
Yeah, so when you drill down into it, I think one is we have to really make sure that we're doing this in a way that is the most affordable possible. So the cost impact we have to be careful of, because this is a huge transition, and we want to make sure, first of all, that we don't create economic harm as we do this as a country and as a state and as the company. But we also want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that doesn't disadvantage further the most disadvantaged communities and populations that we have, which right now often suffer the most from sort of the impact of our energy production, particularly from pollution and other impacts. So I would say affordability is a huge piece of it. And then how do we actually change customers' behavior to actually select the right technologies that are going to be the ones that are going to get us to that future? We spent a lot of time trying to think about that and make sure that the way that we roll things out, the policies we support are designed to actually sort of incentivize people to make those technology choices, so that we aren't building things and investing in technologies that are going to actually be the wrong ones for the long term. The last piece I'll say is long-term planning, really important in our industry. We've got to figure out what the grid is going to need to look like in the longer term, and work back from there, and make sure that we're making those technology choices that will be sustainable, so that the grid it's going to work differently. It already is working differently than it did 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, but it's going to have to work differently as we deploy new resources. We can come to that again. I think some of the things we saw in California with some outages this summer are an indication of how we need to plan differently for the future grid.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, looking then, just finally before we kind of speak with Bruce as well and bring him in. Obviously, we noticed recently you reached that 50% mark of that 2045 goal. Obviously, big congratulations on that. I think kind of two questions really, reasonably broad ones at that. But I guess kind of firstly, what are the major successes in you being able to get to that 50%? And I guess more poignantly, especially looking, like you say, at everything that's going on in the world now, I guess, what are the kind of barriers to you kind of going and getting that next 50%?
Yeah, so to date, I mean, I think the drivers to the 50% sort of clean energy, renewable, it's been mostly through renewable energy, a lot of wind and then solar in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, especially. A lot of that's been driven by, supporting policies that have been good for driving adoption of those technologies and allowing the commercial scale up of wind and solar renewables and now storage, so that the technologies advanced and the costs have come down. I mean, that's been a huge driver of why we are where we are today. We have been able to take advantage of the continuing cost declines. If you look at what we contracted wind for 10, 15 years ago, and what we're contracting solar mostly now for, I mean, even storage, it's come way down, and that has to continue, and I think we need to keep focusing on that. The challenges going forward, I think, are probably a couple. One is, again, getting customers to adopting. So as we move away from the grid for a second and just think about transportation electrification, first of all, there has to be more choice available in models of vehicles, and we think that's coming. But the catch-22 is we also need to make sure that people are comfortable using them and adopting them. So that means more charging infrastructure so that people know that they can charge when and where they need to and in a way that makes sense for them. And then both for light-duty passenger vehicles, which is a lot of the focus, but also frankly, for fleets and medium and heavy duty. We have a whole program now where we're deploying several $100 million to try to actually get more heavy and medium duty charging infrastructure out there. So building the technology to support choices like electrification of transportation is really huge. Frankly, a lot of it's education too, making sure that people know what choices they have for consumers. And then I think, what I said, as I said earlier, one of the biggest challenges in this transition is being really thoughtful about how all of these new energy technologies are going to work together differently than the current grid design, and what that grid design needs to look like to accommodate that. If you think about the fact that what we're saying is that people are going to rely on the electric grid as their fuel delivery mechanism and infrastructure much more heavily, 2-3x times what they are now for much more of their lives. And so everything from working at home or working in offices, we're seeing now with COVID, working at home, to all your transportation are a big significant part of it, to heating and cooling your buildings, your offices, heating your water, all of those things. A significant percentage of that's going to be driven using the grid. That grid then is going to need to be much more reliable, resilient, available in a different way than we've had in the past. We're starting to think about all that. Those are the areas I think we have to pay attention to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's really insightful as well. And I think we'll come on to some of that in a moment. I know obviously the recent announcement and approval for you guys with regards to Charge Ready 2 as well, which is obviously more brilliant news we've seen from you recently. But yeah, before we kind of move on to more conversations around that, it'd be great to bring Bruce at this point. So Bruce, obviously, thank you as well very much for joining us today. It's the same question as to Drew, really, to start things off, just for those tuned in who are perhaps less familiar. Can you give us an intro to your role at NRG Energy and I guess the kind of wider vision and strategy with regard to the energy transition?
Sure, Owen. Well, as Drew started out, I will also thank you for the opportunity to join this webinar and to share some perspectives from the NRG side. And always a pleasure to be able to sit next to Drew, albeit virtually here. But I head up the strategy and M&A group at NRG. And so what that essentially entails is really leading NRG's activities related to corporate strategy, mergers and acquisitions, strategic alliances, and strategic investments. My team and I, we work very closely with all of NRG's businesses to assist them in executing their respective strategic plans in a manner which is consistent with NRG's overall corporate strategy. So that, in a nutshell, is my role at the company.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks for that. Looking then within that role, and I guess within that strategy for NRG, Bruce. So Drew talked earlier around kind of that highly electrified and kind of system. What would you say your vision is for a sustainable energy future system, and what does that ecosystem look like in your eyes?
Well, obviously, Drew sits at a company which is very focused on the infrastructure side of things. That's what their knitting is, and that's what they do. For us, we take a little bit of a different spin as we think about our strategy in terms of the sustainable energy future, and we think about that squarely through the customer. Because and Drew touched on this a little bit as well in his comments, but we believe that it is going to be the decisions of customers that will really help to lead the way towards clean energy infrastructure. For us at NRG, customers are really shaping the products and the offerings that we provide to them. They're really shaping the investments that we make and how we think about our business on a go-forward basis. It's quite a shift for a company like NRG, whose former knitting was as a big centralized unregulated generator. But it's one that we've made over the past several years, and it's one that we are very much committed to as we look forward here. And quite frankly, we're quite excited about it. We are excited to see the sort of consumer-led disruption that the sector is experiencing. And we do think it's going to have a very meaningful impact in terms of addressing this energy transition as we're talking about today.
Sure. No, that's, I guess, super important as well when you look at obviously the end impacts, I guess, of everything we're talking about around kind of climate, ultimately the customer, the consumer, and kind of the wider society is something that really shouldn't be overlooked. I think, I guess, a slightly more specific question, and looking, I guess, at that energy mix and potentially kind of customer demand as well. We've seen recently in Europe the announcements around a coal power station, and obviously the inability for to get that up and off the ground in Germany. Would be interested to hear. Obviously, we know that coal still plays a role in your in your energy mix as an organisation. Would be interested just to hear from you how that squares with what your kind of your strategy is, and how that fits into kind of your kind of clean energy goals.
Sure. Look, I mean, we think about the future energy mix as sort of a multifaceted kind of proposition here. There's no denying the increasing role that renewables has played and continues to play and will play as far as the energy mix is concerned. But at the same time that we think about all of the attendant benefits of renewables, we can't forget about kind of reliability. And I mean, even the events of this past summer, although I don't know whether summer's over or not, but or this summer in California, does sort of continue to prove that reliability is of paramount importance. And so, notwithstanding the continued and the increasing presence of renewables in our fuel mix, we do think that natural gas will continue to play at least some role for a period of time in order to help bridge that period between, the onset of storage, economic storage, that is. I think the other part of how we think about fuel mix is ultimately, again, going back to the customer, going to be driven by the customer, and we are doing a little bit of this ourselves by virtue of helping customers work through how they can, think about ways of better procuring renewable power. Particularly, we have a product called Renewable Select, which really takes a lot of the mystification associated with PPAs out of the hands of our customers, and just really boil it down to what would otherwise be a pretty standard supply contract with them. So I think that's how we think about overall fuel mix on a go-forward basis. As it relates to your question regarding coal, you are correct that coal does continue to exist within our fleet. The reality is, over the past several years, and as we continue to think through this and redefine our business, we acknowledge that our business model is evolving, and that eventually we will have to address issues related to our coal position one way or another. But a lot of that is going to be a function of how we think about their financial efficacy and how that impacts our ability to make sure that we can continue to provide reliable power to our customers just the same.
Sure. No, really do appreciate that that feedback and kind of that response as well, Bruce. So it's interesting to hear. I guess to bring Drew into the conversation as well now, and I guess not to potentially bring up that word that we've all probably heard much too much over the last few months, but a big factor and a big thing still going on in the world, obviously around the pandemic and COVID-19. We've heard a lot coming out in the space around it, and I think the question is now moving on to not how has it impacted you so far so much, but really looking forward and how you continue to look at your business models, how you prepare for that electrified, for that customer-centric, low-carbon economy, essentially. What role do you see COVID having? I know it's hard to say exactly how long it will stay around for, but how are you going to continue to prepare for potential uncertainties? Just
is that for me or for Drew?
we can throw it out there to everyone to take that one first.
I'll let Drew go first.
Then you can come back and join us. Well, thanks, Owen. So it's a really frankly, it's a really tough question in some ways that we've spent some time, thinking about. Is because in one sense, this is such a huge event, this pandemic that we're experiencing for all of us, both personally, from a work standpoint, company, all of it, obviously. And so I don't want to play that down by any means. And we have been, as you can imagine, and I know Bruce, your NRG is, and all of us in the critical infrastructure and critical energy supply businesses have been very focused on just keeping the business running for the last 6-7 months. And we will continue to do that as this rolls forward. And that's been really critical. I think the thing that I would take away from it as we've looked at this is not only has, I think, it not changed our conviction for the importance of our strategy in the long term as a company, and frankly, more broadly as an industry. And I don't want to speak for other electric utilities, but we spend a lot of time talking to them. And I think I feel like they're all saying the same thing. This is actually underscoring the need to do more and to be aware of the fact that you just referred to it, that there is more volatility coming. Things like this happen, and that means that we have to be prepared for these unexpected events, and we have to make sure that our businesses and our business models, but our systems are ready to handle them as well, and to continue to run. As I said earlier, we already are a critical energy supply infrastructure. We think we're going to electric system, whether it's Bruce, your side of the business, ours, we're all going to be even more critical to sort of our society, to life as we go forward. So the pandemic just underscores that to me in one way. The other thing I think it's done is I've been very interested to see that the policymakers that we talk to, and frankly our customers, and many of them like customers of yours, Bruce, who are before all of this were saying, we want more choice. We want more. We didn't understand how to do more renewables. We're focusing on being more sustainable. That's only continuing and actually growing. The focus on sustainability across large corporate America and now medium-sized businesses, the focus on getting to a clean energy path that is both economical and long-term, puts them in the right position from a climate change and a sustainability standpoint, is becoming more and more important, I think, and not less in the face of the pandemic. Now, I think there are some headwinds. I do think that the economic disruption that is coming from this pandemic, we are still trying to understand it, and we'll continue to feel significant economic disruption in sectors that may put headwinds on some investments that people would otherwise have made. I think the auto industry is an example of where that has slowed things down in terms of deployment. There's no doubt that it slowed it down, but I don't think it's a fundamental shift myself. I think it just underscores the need for us to actually do more at this time. And I think our customers are telling us that.
Yeah, I couldn't. Well, I couldn't agree more with Drew in terms of his comments. I think they're certainly spot on. I mean, I think from an NRG standpoint, again, we experienced this pandemic really through the eyes of our customers and recognized just how important it was for us as critical infrastructure to really ensure that our customers are powered and that they're able to do what they need to do and to be productive in a way that nobody's really had to be productive before. And so I think if anything, we really see this situation as certainly it's a wake-up call, but I think it's actually really a great opportunity for new innovation to really come out of all of this, to really figure out how we as a company can continue to provide the services, the products and services to our customers that they're going to need in these types of situations. And it's going to, it's really forced us to really think about how we can innovate around that and continue to deliver value to our customers.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's important. I think a potential segue back to what Drew was talking about at the top, and obviously looking at some of those sectors which were hit potentially harder but hit in different ways by the pandemic, and obviously the associated fall in demand, fall in oil price, etc. And then when we look at that mobility question and how that kind of links into the transition space, probably to pass back to you. I know this is something you're very much involved with at the moment, and we did touch upon that announcement earlier, but would be good just to hear a little bit more about that announcement and the approval of Charge Ready 2, and I guess what that means for you and for the mobility space more generally.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of context, and it's funny. I think back, it's just been 3 or 4 years, and I think a lot of people are much more aware of this now. But when we first did that first Pathway 2030 paper that I mentioned, sort of our clean energy electrification pathway approach to get to 2030 goals, we thought and we assumed that electrifying transportation, the sector would be one of the things that would come out of that analysis. And we sort of did the analysis of what are the measures you need to take and rank them. It's become more and more clear that is, one of the places that the energy industry is really focusing, and that we really need to lean into. So as we were, when we saw that back in 2017, we launched, even a little before that, our first Charge Ready pilot, which was, focused on just initially trying to get more charging infrastructure out and for medium light duty vehicles in our service territory. That pilot got extended. So far, we've installed about 1,800 chargers. It's about just under $50 million program so far in that pilot. And we decided when we saw how successful it was a couple of years ago, that we would ask our commission to approve a full-blown program to really try to accelerate the electrification of vehicles that we think we need in the state. We think we need to get to 7 million electric vehicles in the state by 2030. And, that's still a really heavy lift. It's great signs and a lot of good progress, but to get there just by 2030, we need to really accelerate adoption, customers choosing it. We need more models, but we need the infrastructure out there. So
sure.
This Charge Ready 2 program that we just had approved, we had asked for over $700 million, both for infrastructure and education, and getting the word out. We knew we were unlikely to probably get all of it. It's a big ask, but we thought we could justify it. But we were really pleased to get $436 million approved, which is the biggest single electric charging infrastructure program in the country that we know of so far. And we hope there are others. We hope we're not the biggest for long. Actually, we're working with the rest of our peers in the industry to help them understand what we're doing here, to talk to them about what works and what doesn't. We have a lot of learnings. So we're hoping others are going to get other programs like this. The focus of this one is light duty vehicles. The goal is to install about 38,000 charge ports across our service territory. It's going to be both level 2 and DC fast chargers. We're looking mostly at getting them in what we call long dwell areas, which is multifamily dwellings, apartment buildings, workplaces, public parking lots, other destination centers where people spend more time. So that's the focus of this program. We're also looking at trying to get at least 50% of those chargers installed in disadvantaged communities, especially in multi-unit dwellings, apartment buildings, that kind of thing. Back to that sort of equity point, and making sure that we're bringing along all of our communities and not having this just be something for people who have more economic means. It's a make-ready program. So what this does is it basically allows the utility, us, to go and install all of the make-ready up to the charging port itself. We'll also, in some cases, install and own the charger, or we'll help the customer get a rebate for that charger if it's available, that charge port. So a couple of different models. Our main model is not to own and operate charging networks. We think there's other companies like the one Bruce and I used to know about, EVgo, but others out there who do that, right? But we're actually trying to get the infrastructure out there. Anyways, in addition, we also have a medium heavy duty program I mentioned earlier, which is in process right now. It's been going for a little over a year, and we're really focused on fleets there, both municipal transit bus fleets, port charging infrastructure in our ports here, and then medium heavy duty truck fleets is the focus for that. So very exciting. We're really pleased that the commission came along with us and understands the importance of this. And we think it is a big step towards electrifying the transportation sector.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant, and I think obviously within the context of the conversation we're having today, it's super interesting to hear how that vision that you talked of that kind of highly electrified system in the future is having an impact today or over the last 4 years of this program, and looking forward how that's having that tangible impact on what you're doing now, really. So that's brilliant and really interesting to hear. I think similar question, and obviously a different context for Bruce, really, but that vision that you talked about in terms of kind of customer and consumer focused kind of energy, I guess. How is that impacting then today, I guess, the way that you structure your business models and your strategies internally within NRG?
Well, I mean, look, I think from our success is really more reliant than ever before, no pun intended, on on earning and keeping, every single one of our customers, right? And what this means is we're more focused than ever before on pleasing them and fulfilling their needs with compelling products and services. Ensuring our power plants are the safest and most reliable and cost efficient, and ensuring that we continue to remain competitive. It's as pretty simple as that. The reality is we do like to do our part, however, on ensuring that we're doing all the things to further sort of this sustainability kind of mantra. We advocate and work with policymakers to really adopt regulatory frameworks that send the right signals, whether that be for investment or for competition. We've shown support for an economy-wide price on carbon, and we're very big on partnering initiatives such as the City of Houston's Climate Action Plan, where the mandate there is to help communities and organizations make this transition to sustainability, as well as getting involved in a program called Evolve Houston, which again, going back to the electrification, the vehicle electrification conversation, we too see very much the need for a company such as ours to be involved in that. We obviously did play a role in that at one point or another in a slightly different way. I think as we go forward here, our role as it relates to vehicle electrification is squarely going to be on the customer and really helping the customer think through the benefits of electric vehicle ownership and how they can continue to use that type of an asset effectively in their overall lives from an electricity standpoint.
Sure. No, interesting, and I think it talks to something Drew kind of briefly touched on earlier as well, around kind of, I guess, looking outwards. We've talked a lot so far around NRG strategy and Edison strategy, but looking into the wider energy community and probably acknowledging, obviously, that we can't get kind of to net zero or talk about any of this in isolation. What can other companies do? I guess what can you do to help them, but more generally, what can they do to optimize their business models and ensure that they're preparing themselves and readying themselves for the energy transition that ultimately has already begun? I guess, Drew, to throw it to you first, is there any kind of advice or any things that you would recommend there?
Look, I think that Bruce has touched on it too. Part of this is education that we see in terms of making sure people understand and companies understand not only the current energy choices, but where we see the sort of the future of the energy supply system going, and understanding, for instance, the full economic impact and potential for clean energy. We have a smaller business outside of Southern California, Edison, called Edison Energy, that does exactly this for larger commercial industrial customers across the US, actually now internationally in Europe and in Canada and Mexico as well. And one of the things that we talk to them about is how to have an integrated approach to their energy supply. And if they want renewables, looking at that as part of their whole energy supply picture, and how to do that in a way that allows them, as I said earlier, to think about it as as part of their overall sustainability efforts. And so I think you're seeing a lot more and more companies try to take this more integrated approach. It is, they're always driven by cost and the economics. Certainly, we anchor in that always with them. I think you have to be, but I think just like with electric transportation, looking beyond the upfront costs that your people are used to looking at, for instance, acquiring fleet vehicles, but looking at the total cost of ownership of your vehicles, and understanding not only that can be an advantage over time because other costs are lower when you put electric vehicles in they're more efficient engines, right? Electric motors are more efficient than internal combustion engines. The overall fuel usage is lower. There's lower maintenance. All those things now are well established across a number of vehicle classes. If you combine that with the GHG and reduction impact, and if you assign value to that as a company, you can really start looking at the value proposition of the clean energy transition on a more holistic basis very differently than I think they have in the past. And so, to me, I think that's one thing I would encourage them is to, make sure you're getting smart about how to think about the whole picture. I would just say, I think companies, most of they're forward looking and realizing this clean energy transition isn't a question of whether it's happening. It's already happening. We can see that across the country in terms of the commitments that energy companies like ours and Bruce's are making to reduce carbon, but now non-energy companies. So how do you make sure that you're ready for that? Is by getting smarter about it and taking that little bit longer term view and a more integrated approach.
Sure. So I guess that that kind of acknowledgement, and then I guess looking at that big picture and that integrated approach with that in mind, I guess. Bruce, anything that you would add in there? It'd be good to get your thoughts as well.
The only thing I would add is that in order for other companies to do their part, I think it's really important to just listen to your customers and listen to what they're asking for and listen to what they're demanding for, frankly, and sort of, adjust accordingly. I think now more than ever, everybody is beginning to realize that, electricity can be customizable. And, in this day and age where everybody's used to sort of getting what they want, when they want, and how they get it, that's going to be sort of an unavoidable trend, I think, for companies such as ours and Drew's and anyone else involved in this sector. You're just going to have to pay attention to it. And so I think for other companies that are out there, it's just going to be very important to just continue to listen to your customer. Now more than ever, I guess what's the old adage, like the customer's always right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that kind of brings us on, and I guess probably to stick with you on that one, because you've spoken on that customer element quite a lot. I guess when looking at the customer, when looking at the consumer, at the end of the day, how do we ensure that as we do kind of get on board with this transition that's happening around us now and potentially taking pace with everything that's been going on, how do we ensure that the people aren't left behind? How do we ensure improved diversity, improved equality, and more inclusive business models as we at the same time press ahead with driving for low carbon and driving for more sustainable energy?
Well, look, I mean, I think Drew touched on this earlier, but again, I think sort of advocacy and education are always very important elements in our sector, and certainly would continue to be very important elements as we think through, increasing inclusivity and whatnot. And I mean, look, the reality is electricity is a necessity that powers people's lives, and it's going to be even more so the case going forward. And it's certainly a priority for us to make clean energy accessible to all of our customers, regardless of what their particular situations are. And cost is going to be an issue, and we are trying to do our part to be able to make sure that we can provide low cost power, low cost renewable power for the benefit of our customers. And so the route that we've chosen as we sit here today is to go and procure long-term PPAs from renewable developers at prices that we believe will translate into affordable power for our customers, affordable renewable power for our customers.
No, brilliant. And yeah, thanks for that as well. It's interesting just to hear more, I guess, about that work you're doing around that. Drew, is there anything you would add to that piece?
I just to underscore, two things. One is that we're, especially inside, obviously the regulated utility, one of the core principles of sort of the way we do business is that we have to make sure we're investing prudently for all of our customers, and always trying to do look at affordability. It doesn't always mean it's the lowest cost option, but we do have to look at what the best fit is, given the cost and the ultimate benefit to all of our customers. So we do, we essentially are spending their money for them and trying to invest it in the long term for the best result for everyone. I think the other thing we are always conscious of is making sure that when we design programs for our customers, when we advocate for policies or programs that we need that others are going to do, that we're really looking at making sure that the cost impacts are spread fairly, and so that those who we need to bring along, who can't necessarily afford those technology choices early on until the costs come down, but we bring everybody along at the same time, and that may mean different rates for different classes of folks, and making sure that those the most disadvantaged communities are getting the benefit of the subsidies and the programs that are designed to help them. So we spend a lot of time really trying to, like with our Charge Ready, to make sure that there is always a piece that's focused on how can we bring the disadvantaged communities and our underrepresented populations along to get the advantage at the same time of those new programs and technologies. I think it's a design thing for us, always in what we try to do.
Interesting. No, interesting. A question actually has just come in, kind of linked to that, and I guess, potentially it's somewhat an unneutral question when you talk about the right choices. But the question is, what assistance then and guidance when we talk about the customer and making sure that we have them in mind? What assistance are you able to give, or do you give as an organization, to ensure that those customers do make, potentially inverted commas, the right choice with regard to energy?
Yeah, so we try to provide information always, so education and information around the benefits and the relative costs of different technology choices, especially, again, putting it in the context of sort of the longer term impact. I think we've had pretty good success, not just in California but across the country, really, in the last 20 years, doing this in the energy efficiency space. There's always more that could be done there, but I think that's a great way to think about how we're trying to talk about electrification, transportation, or building electrification, is the way we have about energy efficiency, which is making people aware that there's money and help available. These are the benefits it can give you, and it can reduce your costs and your energy footprint over time. And so, just that's really sort of the fundamental thing, I think, is getting them that information in a consistent, understandable way, that we can help them make those choices. I agree with Bruce that the customer, it's about customer choice. I guess I don't want to be controversial, but one of the challenges is that the customer isn't always right if they don't have the right information, right? And that's the challenge that we're trying to overcome.
Yeah, Bruce, is there anything kind of you'd add? Do you agree with that sentiment, or yeah, I guess what do you guys do to ensure that the customers are making?
No, I mean, look, again, this goes back to education. I mean, I think, again, Drew, Drew's right. The customer is always right, provided that they are educated. And I think for us, education is twofold. It's one, education around the notion that there is a choice, and that they do have choice, and that they can control sort of their destiny in some respects, but also educating around what the right choices may be for them and for their particular situation.
Sure. No, interesting. conscious of the time, of course, and that we are, getting towards the end, and we do try to make sure that we do get some of our audience questions as well. Hopefully, we've been answering a few as we go through, but potentially to throw a few curveballs which you may wish to answer in your shorthand. Then here we go. I guess the first question. One thing we haven't really covered that much today really is looking at specific asset types or specific technologies. It's not been the primary focus, but nuclear power, is that something that you guys see? And the question really here is that, is net zero possible without it?
Look, I mean, nuclear is a great resource as it relates to its carbon-free attributes. The problem with nuclear as we sit here today, at least from a merchant standpoint, is that it's very difficult to make the economics work for nuclear. Frankly, as we see it, the combination of large-scale solar and then economic storage is going to be just as viable a carbon-free proposition as nuclear. And so, to the extent that there would be cost-effective nuclear alternatives, then I think we wouldn't dismiss that as an opportunity. But I think as we sit here today, we don't really look at nuclear as being something that's kind of in the long-term fuel mix.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And obviously in California, but in the West, nuclear is playing a smaller and smaller role. And I think that is the trend for at least for that part of the country. The economics of building new nuclear, as Bruce said, are not favorable, and so don't make sense now compared to renewables and storage even.
Sure.
And I think that the thing that we have to all, at least in the U.S., continue to make sure we're paying attention to is how do we use the existing nuclear fleet and its zero carbon attributes, as Bruce mentioned, in the transition as we go, in the next 20, 30 years, and make sure we take advantage of those as we build out the other clean energy sources and storage and all of that. So I think there is a role for it, and we need to pay attention to that.
Okay. No, interesting, and appreciate you both kind of exploring that a little bit. I guess to throw the question slightly wider, when we look at it's actually linked to a second question that's just come in as well around kind of technology solutions that are being developed. We hear the buzz technologies at the moment. It was wind and solar, now it's hydrogen, CCS, etc. Are those going to remain the big players, or I guess is there any kind of clean technology solutions that you think are being undervalued or that actually do hold more potential than potentially were being talked about at the moment?
I mean, maybe I'll just jump in. I absolutely think we need to be, all as an industry and more broadly, there needs to be innovation. People need to be looking at other clean energy fuels that are not as prevalent right now. And I think hydrogen certainly has the promise to be one of those. If we're talking about true, green hydrogen, which should be produced from renewables. I think there's an open question around the feasibility and the cost of carbon capture and storage. Again, if it can be developed in a way that makes sense and doesn't have other environmental impacts that are also not something we can live with, then that could be something obviously that could play a role. But I think hydrogen certainly in the West, you hear some talk about developing new sources of renewable natural gas. I think that's a more finite set, perhaps, just given the fuel stock and the cost. But the other thing I know that we keep looking for is other types of storage alternatives that don't exist now, is beyond the batteries, beyond lithium-ion batteries and similar ones. Longer duration storage technologies. I think we will see in the next 10 years more of those perhaps come to market in ways that will be economic in certain use cases, certain places. So there is more technology development to come. I guess the last thing I'd say in technology, and it's not related to the generation source. We have to absolutely focus on grid technology, because we can get a lot of efficiencies out of the existing technologies we have if the grid operates in a more efficient, digitized, automated way. We know that already. We're at the early days of deploying the multi-layer, fully sort of digitized grid that is going to actually make us connect all of these sources of supply and demand, load and demand in a more effective way. And that's an area that I think you'll see a lot of development in the coming 10 to 15 years.
No. Interesting. Bruce, anything to add? Obviously, we've heard around batteries. We've heard some more on hydrogen there. There's actually a question around grid, which I'll come on to in a moment. But anything to add before we do that, Bruce?
No, just again, I think Drew makes a very interesting point about the demand side of the thing, of the realm. I mean, everybody is always so focused on the supply side, but I think that the digitization of the demand side should play an ever increasing role in in addressing some of the issues that we're currently transitioning through. And so, again, the need for just customer education, understanding what they can control and how they can control it, and then giving them the means to be able to do that.
No, that's interesting. I think that demand side question links in slightly to the question again around grid, I guess, and one we've got here, a slightly open question as well, which I'm sure will come nicely. Essentially, your guys' perspectives on the transition from a centralized power distribution, I guess, intrinsically linked with the kind of oil and gas legacy, to the kind of more decentralized, customer-focused owned microgrids, etc. I guess to put a bit more context into the question, how do you think we get there? And is that how you see the grid of the future looking, decentralized and more interactive?
Yeah, so I'll jump in, and Bruce, get your thoughts on it too. And we have started to look at this. We've launched an effort internally we call Reimagining the Grid, and sort of addressing some of these things. I think it's I don't think it's binary, I guess is what I would say. I don't think it's going to be all decentralized. We've already seen some decentralization and of both the supply and demand side with more distributed resources. In California, we have significant penetration of rooftop solar. We've got more and more storage being deployed behind the meter. So that is happening, and that will continue to happen. As we did our initial look at this, I think what we see is a sort of, a set of, 5 or 6 to 7 different sort of archetypes for the grid that will be used in different places, given different needs, depending on, the configuration in that place. So dense urban areas will be different than more spread out, rural areas. Heavy electrification corridors where there's a lot of transportation may look different than ones that are more residential and commercial oriented. So there will certainly be places where micro and mini and macro grids, will make sense. Some grid connected grids of grids. I do not see us moving away from completely the overall efficiencies of the larger centralized transmission system grid that is out there. I think we need to make sure that continues to be very robust. Just the nature of electricity and how it works, that will continue to need to be there. And distribution systems within that will probably be, as I said, be configured differently depending on sort of the needs of the particular area. So it will be more modular, perhaps. Again, if I had to put on my future hat. So not binary, not all decentralized. I think we will have a strong centralized component as well.
So I would agree with that. I don't think it's binary. I don't know that it could ever be binary because, again, different geography in and of itself is different enough that it would make it challenging to think that it could be all one thing versus another. So I do think there needs to be continued innovation around more decentralized alternatives. Particularly continuing to bring that cost down so that it can be a viable option for those that can actually use it appropriately. But yeah, binary seems the most logical.
Yeah.
But non-binary.
Non-binary. Yeah. No. No. Interesting. I think potentially a nice place to finish it as well. And more conversations. I'm sure there could be another whole hour on grids and electrification and the things go with it, but appreciate we're getting to the end of the hour now. So I thank you once again for joining us. It's been a brilliant session. I've very much enjoyed it, and I hope everybody has who's tuning in as well. This is obviously the last episode in the series, which drives towards our November summits. Mr. Pizarro of Edison International and Mr. Gutierrez at NRG Energy will be joining us in November. So we look forward to hearing from them. Drew and Bruce, we thank you again for today, and we hope to see you there as well.
Great. Thanks, Owen.
Oh, thank you, Owen. Appreciate it.
Cheers, guys.
Good to see you, Bruce.
Bye. See you, Drew.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Be safe.
You too.